Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I want to talk about 4 of the 7 books I read in the month of March. So I'm not wrapping up the whole month because I want to wrap up the rest of the books in a separate video after I finish a 4th book, because they were part of my March TBR where I focused on reading books on feminism within Islam and the Muslim world. So I think it would make sense for me to wrap those books up together. So let me get to the first book I read, which was The Fisherman by Chigozie Obioma. I had this on my TBR for such a long time. I predicted this to be a 5-star read, which it didn't end up being, but nonetheless, I would recommend you to check it out if you're interested in the premise and the story, because this was also shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize and a lot of people seem to enjoy it. So basically in this one, we follow 4 brothers who are kind of left to their own devices after their father goes to work in another town, which is so far away that he can't really commute back and forth. And the mother is really busy with raising the smaller children and her work, so they're kind of left to their own. And they go fishing a lot to this local river. And on one of those trips, they encounter this local madman / prophet who predicts that one of the brothers is going to be killed by another brother. So this is the story of what happens afterwards to these brothers and this family, and the impact of this prediction prophecy it has on this family, but on the whole community in general. The question in this book is whether the events that followed happened because is this madman really a prophet? Is there some truth in a madman's prophecy? Or whether it happened because you believed in it. So the consequences of this prophecy maybe are predictable in a way when you think about when this book is set. So this is set in Nigeria in the 90s, in this smaller community where there's still a lot of superstitious belief, the African heritage intermingled with religious belief. So it's kind of, I think these elements kind of set the scene. And especially considering the African heritage is really present throughout in the storytelling itself. And there's a lot of elements in it. So people still believe in something a madman would say, even though the rational mind tells them that this is rubbish. So from that point of view, it's really an interesting story, but it's also a violent story. There are some elements which are really shocking and really hard to read. What I really feel like this lacked was a stronger narrative voice, because this is told from the perspective of the youngest of the boys, which he's like 8th, I think, and the oldest is like 16. So he doesn't really understand what's happening. He has a hard time connecting the dots and he always needs explanations. So we don't really understand it either, or we're trying to understand it together with him. But he tells this story from the perspective of when he was an adult. And I feel like this would have benefited from some insight, from the insight and the experience this narrator would have gained with age. But that was really left out. We were really left with that young boy and really how he experienced those events in that moment. So overall, I would recommend you to check it out if the premise sounds interesting. But for me, I don't feel like it lived up to the hype. I will definitely check out what this author comes out with, because I believe this was his debut. But unfortunately, this wasn't the 5-star read I predicted. The next 3 ones are all ones I listened to. And the first one is a short story collection, Things We Lost in the Fire by Mariana Enriquez. Now this is actually a collection of horror stories, and I've never ever read anything like this before. I saw this book going around on BookTube when it came out, and a lot of people seemed to enjoy them. So I picked it up because I was reading books by Argentinian authors. And it is quite a captivating and quite an interesting short story collection, because it captivates contemporary Argentina with its corruption, with its inequality. There's some common elements in this, as in the abandoned child, as in girlhood and friendship between girls, and competition and meanness between young girls, but also as in the man, the husband, the boyfriend as the other, as the undesirable element in your life, as someone you want to break away from, as in men don't really understand women. And I feel like these elements kind of brought these stories together. What made this, I think, more interesting for me is that most of these stories have a supernatural element to them. So they kind of felt like a bit of a fantasy, magical realism mesh, I would say. And they're really vivid stories which kind of stick in your mind and you really can't forget, despite how gruesome and shocking they are. So if you love short stories like these, then I would highly recommend you to check them out. I've already picked up Mariana Enriquez's second short story collection, which is, I would say, similar to this one. Despite thinking that I need some break from these shocking stories, but for some reason they are so captivating that I just wanted to read them as soon as they were available from my library. The next book I listened to is War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi, and I definitely picked this up because of the cover. I think it's stunning. So this is a sci-fi novel which is based on true events. So basically this is set in 2172, where the earth is pretty much uninhabitable and much of the developed Western world have fled to colonies in space. This book is set in Nigeria, where there's war raging, and this war mirrors actual historic events which happened in Nigeria in the 1960s, I believe, and it is the Biafran War. So basically we follow two girls who end up being on the opposite ends of this war, because we follow one of the girls, Onyi, she's on the cover. She is fighting for the Biafrans, and Ife, who is a Nigerian, and she ends up having some sort of a role in their administration of Nigeria. So basically this war happened because part of the country, I believe the southern part, wanted to secede, they wanted to form their own country, Biafra. And of course Nigeria didn't agree with that. And it was a gruesome war where a lot of people died. There was famine and a lot of people were displaced. A lot of people and a lot of children were used in these fighting. And this really depicts how these children were used in that war. So basically in this time, in this world here, there's a lot of technical advancement. Our main character, Onyi, she has a bionic arm. There are people who have artificial limbs and artificial organs. And I really enjoyed the world and the technological part of it. But I don't feel like that had a lot to do with the story. So this is pretty much steeped in the history of Nigeria. I can't really disassociate it from that and just look at it as a sci-fi novel, because it's mostly a commentary on that war. And I think also that is what the author intended this to be, to raise awareness to that war, because not a lot of people know about it. I will definitely check out the following installments in this story, even though I wasn't really that captivated by it. I don't know, for some reason I felt a bit removed from our main characters, and maybe it had to do something with the way it was written or the narrative voice of these characters. We follow both of the main characters, and they have their perspective moving back and forth. And there's a conflict between these two main characters as well, because yeah, it is about what war does to people and what you as a person who was fighting in this war have to do or end up doing because of circumstances. Overall, I really enjoyed it, and I'm not sure what the next book is going to be about, because I don't feel like it ended in a typical fantasy sci-fi type of a cliffhanger. So yeah, let me know if you have heard about this or you have read it and what you thought about it. I feel like this is such a unique sci-fi story, and especially because of how it is connected to Nigerian history. And the last book I listened to was A Court of Silver and Flames by Sarah J. Maas. And this is book 4 in A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I don't know why I always stumble on these long titles. But yeah, I picked this book up in audio format, and I believe that was a wrong choice for me. I wasn't sure that I'm going to continue with this series, because I felt like I was pretty much done after reading the 3rd book. Because overall, even though Sarah J. Maas's books have some quality to them which makes them a bit addictive, for me they're mostly guilty pleasure reads at this point. But I feel like there's just too much over-the-top drama between these characters and the way their relationships are depicted. And there's just so certain elements which are so overemphasized that it just becomes too much. I picked this book up because of the main character, Nesta, who is a really strong female character. And she has this very unique story, or had it up until this point, which made me really curious as to know what's going to happen to her and what her story is going to be like. But overall, I feel like this was too much focused on the romantic element and not so much on the plot. And I feel like kind of the author gave up pretense of also writing for a younger audience, kind of gave up pretense of more or less writing a good fantasy, and focused much more on the romance here, which is fine. I don't mind a good smutty romance every once in a while. But when you come to it to read about a world, a fantasy world, you kind of end up being disappointed. Or at least I did. I know a lot of people still enjoy these books, but also I know that a lot of people kind of feel the same way. What I didn't enjoy about the narrator was that she overemphasized. She didn't keep a neutral tone. She overemphasized certain elements, certain words, certain scenes, and this really lends itself to the writing, but I believe that she should have kept maybe a more neutral tone, because it kept taking me out of the story. And I can really compare it now to some of the Bridgerton books I also listened to recently, where the author kept a neutral tone throughout. I think I enjoyed that much better. At least I could immerse myself in the story much better and not focus too much on the voice of the narrator. So I think this is going to be it for me with Sarah J. Maas. I mean, as I said, it's a guilty pleasure, but I feel like this book kind of like really disappointed me and really made me not feel any interest whatsoever on what's going to happen in this world anymore, because it was just too much. Let me know if you have read it and what you thought about it. But I don't know, it was just still thinking about it today, and that the narrative voice is just it just makes me chuckle. Anyway, so these are all the 4 books I wanted to talk about. I don't know, I don't feel like they've been the best books I've read this month, but I'm happy that I picked up some sci-fi and fantasy, because I used to read, at least fantasy, I used to read much more in the last couple of years, 3, 4 maybe even. And I haven't read so much in these past couple of months, half a year even, a year I would believe. I read much more hard-hitting books, much more literary fiction. And even though I enjoy those books, I feel like a good fantasy is great to have in the mix at all times, because they're so, you can really switch off your brain while reading it, and they're just so immersive and so captivating if they're well written. I really love immersing myself in a great fantasy world. So I think I will do that much more moving forward, at least to have one on the go constantly. So this is where I will stop now because I feel like I've been talking forever and ever and I want to go and make some dinner. So thank you very much for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.